Hey guys. Okay, so I'm going to get started then. Thanks again, everyone, for coming to today's podcast festival. It's a little bit different to be doing an event that is live, but also online. But we've done a lot of good work to bring this to you today. Really appreciate you guys coming out. My name is Richie. I'm one of the co-founders of Raw Talk Podcast. And in this session, I'm going to give you guys a bit of an overview about what it takes to start a podcast. And this will by no means be an exhaustive list, but I'm going to give you some of the key considerations that sort of we went through when we were launching Raw Talk Podcast. And just a quick reminder, after the session at 2:25, we have another panel on starting a podcast with some of our own members from Raw Talk Podcast, but also some members of the student podcast community who are going to share some of their insights. I will also do my best to try to address your questions. So if you have any, just throw them into the chat. And if there's time, I'll do my best to answer them. But if not, I will remind you guys that at 4:10 today, we actually have another session. It'll be like a group discussion and a brainstorming session where if you don't get your questions answered here, you'll certainly be able to go and discuss them with the team. So that's going to be at 4:10. Okay, so I'm just going to get started. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of an idea of how we got started and then go into some key considerations when it comes to making a podcast. And, the way that we sort of came up is by no means, an exclusive way to start a podcast, but hopefully some of our stories are going to resonate with you guys when you're starting up some of your programs. So this is a picture that's very near and dear to my heart. It was taken, actually about 4 years ago when we were first starting off. So this was our first season of Raw Talk Podcast. And back then we were actually called the Raw Data Podcast. And you can see that this is our original team of 10 individuals, some of whom are actually still here, which is really great. And since that time, we've actually expanded quite a bit. So to give you a sense of how we got going, originally the idea for Raw Talk came out of the Institute of Medical Science, or the IMS, which is a really massive grad department at the U of T Faculty of Medicine. We had hundreds of researchers and hundreds of students, but the problem was that everyone was kind of interspersed at different hospital sites. And so there wasn't quite a research community where people, students and faculty members could exchange ideas and have a sense of what other people were doing. There were kind of disparate events, but being in person, it was really hard to attract the whole student body and the faculty body in one place to kind of have these discussions. And originally, Raw Talk started off as a video idea. But as we kind of got going with these videos where we were filming faculty members and asking them about their research, we realized that a lot of these things a lot of these insights that the faculty members were sharing about their research could actually fit really well into this long form podcast format that you hear today. So in fall of 2016, we launched our first season, which back then was called the Raw Data Podcast. A couple months after that, we rebranded as the Raw Talk Podcast. And our next big milestone came in the fall of 2018 when we were starting our third season with the advent of Grace and Melissa as our new executive producers. We decided that we would expand the scope of Raw Talk Podcast to cover the entirety of the U of T Faculty of Medicine. So trying to look at all the grad departments and not only talking to faculty members about their stories, but using every episode as a dedicated theme to talk to all different kinds of experts, including scientists and physicians and policymakers, but also some of their students, patients, so people impacted by a lot of this research. And from there, we kind of got going. And this is sort of a product of all of our hard work that you see today. So just to move forward, I'm going to give you some of the key considerations that you might want to look at when you're starting your podcast. And, a lot of these are seemingly very obvious, but really you want to ask yourself why you want to start a podcast, what you want to talk about, whether there's going to be a running theme, who you want to target it to, whether you want to have certain guests, how big your team is going to be, right? So what are the resources that you're working with in presenting the show? And it's also really important to consider the format. Is it going to be something that's really long form and discussion oriented where you're delving really deeply, you're doing minimal editing, or is it going to be something that's shorter and maybe more segment oriented where you're looking at talking with very specific people and it almost sounds like more of a radio format, right? And so things like length and how things are going to sound and whether you're going to have sound effects and things like that are going to come into play. And hopefully what you guys are going to come away with after this talk is you're going to go and start listening to every single radio show and every single podcast that you already enjoy and picking up on some of these details, right? How much editing can you detect? What is the format like? Are they having long conversations? Are they having brief segments? Things like that. And hopefully it'll give you a better sense of what kind of program you want to put together. So here are some of the key sort of logistics that you want to be looking at when you're starting a podcast. The most important one is funding. And I'd like to remind you guys that we're sponsored today by MBNA TD Insurance. And we actually reached out to them through a U of T scholarship in order to get some of this funding. But your funding is by no means limited to specific agencies. So if you're part of a university, you can always go and try to ask your department, either through official channels or through unofficial channels, in trying to convince that buy-in. But maybe you want to do something like a live event, which is something that we did a couple of years ago, where we actually reached out to J Labs and asked them if we could use their facilities to host one of our live events, right? And so this is also sort of a form of sponsorship. So I would encourage you guys to get as creative as possible. And it never hurts to ask if you're able to kind of show people your idea. There's a lot of support that you're probably going to garner for it if you just kind of look around, right? So my next couple of slides will be devoted to planning and recording, audio production, distribution, and promo. And with regard to the second or the third bullet, so audio production, we actually have our lead audio engineer, Alex, who's going to be talking about all things audio engineering at 3:35. So please look out for that if you're interested. So planning and recording, the way that we do things is by no means the best way to do things, but we found that this is how a lot of podcasts do it. So we use an external recorder. So I have here a Zoom H5, but we've also used a Zoom H6, and it uses a very standard XLR input in order for you to connect your microphones. We also use these mics that we have here, the Audio-Technica ATR 2100, but I've listed some alternatives here that you can use depending on your budget, and we found that this is able to deliver some of the best sound that you can kind of get. Early on, we were using these little like portable smartphone mics, which were good for, sort of for the purpose. They were super portable. However, we found that they didn't really produce the best audio. And when it came time to kind of step up our game and sound a little bit more professional, we knew that we needed an upgrade. So I encourage you to maybe look at some of these things when you're starting some of your own programs. And you really want to ask yourself how you want your show to sound. To what degree do you want it to kind of sound professional? Where do you see the quality being? And the other thing that I'll say, just to my last bullet, is that limiting background noise is super crucial, right? And you may not notice it at first when you're recording something, but as soon as you play it back, and especially when you start listening to other shows, you're going to start hearing varying degrees of background noise. And this is when things like, how you hold your mic, the quality of your mic, whether your room is soundproof. These are things that come into play when it comes to making sure that your hardware is sounding as good as it can get. So a little bit about audio production. Obviously, we have a dedicated team of really hardworking engineers that cut together all the different segments that we record, add the theme audio, and add different transitions. And this is accomplished largely through the means of these softwares, these pieces of software. And I'm not going to tell you which one is the best. So we started off with the one on the bottom right, which is called Hindenburg, which was really, it was reasonably priced. It was pretty easy to use and very convenient. Since that time, we've switched to Adobe Audition, which is sort of like the Photoshop of audio editing. And we've actually found that that is the most powerful tool. It's a little bit more tricky to use. It has a bit of a learning curve, but it really is going to let you leverage a lot of what you get from your raw audio and turn it into however you want it to sound. So Alex is going to chat a little bit more about that. And there's also Audacity, and the best part about Audacity is that it's free and you can just kind of jump in and get started. And there's lots of online support for all three, so you can look out for that. So really quickly, distribution and promotion is also super important. You want to make sure that if you have a great idea, you're able to get it out to your audience. And part of that, a big part of that is actually branding. So you can see we have our logos. You see our EPs from seasons 3 and 4, Grace and Melissa, who were at the Medical Sciences building telling people about Raw Talk. We had posters. So all of this design has gone into sort of, what you call our branding, our aesthetic. And, different people may choose to put different amounts of stock into that. But nevertheless, having an image, having a unified format is reasonably important. In terms of hosting, there's a couple of different platforms that you can use. We use Blueberry, which is the first one. But yeah, it is a really great idea to have a dedicated host that can handle all of your podcast related needs, including tracking your listenership, seeing where your listeners are coming from, publishing it to all the different places that you find podcasts, whether it's on your app or on Spotify or something like that. Website and social media, of course, we're on all the different social media channels, and we also have a website. So you should definitely look into that. And we encourage you guys after this session to just go on our website, rawtalkpodcast.com, and just have a look around for ideas that hopefully will serve as inspiration for how you guys want to run your programs. And outreach is really important, right? You always want to be taking in input from your audience, making sure you know who's listening, trying to see if you can attract more people. And ultimately, it's with outreach that you're able to connect with the people who are most interested in your content, who are then going to be your biggest supporters and help you grow the show. So what are some of the main takeaways? You should absolutely embrace constant growth, change, and expansion. I mean, I showed you we started with a team of 9 or 10 individuals. Right now, the whole kind of Raw Talk wide team is approaching 50 people. So that's a lot of people. And our format has changed quite a bit since we started 4 years ago. And, this sort of ties in with the second point, which is you shouldn't be afraid to fail. Right? Sometimes we feel like we need to put out a very perfect product. And if we don't, then, it's going to fall apart or people aren't going to listen to it. But that really doesn't take into account the journey, right? The growth journey, which involves making a lot of mistakes, right? I mean, we've had, I would say, a handful of episodes, maybe more than a handful, where we would listen back after the episode was published and we said, you know what, we could have done this better and this better and this better. But that doesn't necessarily take away from the quality of these episodes. They were still great episodes, but by being able to recognize some of these things and knowing that this is an iterative growth process, we were able to look at some of the things that maybe didn't work so well in the past and to improve on them, right? Whether it was from an audio engineering standpoint, whether it was from an interviewing standpoint, whether it was from an editing standpoint, like anything like that, right? You should always be listening for some of the things that work really well and double down on those, and maybe some of the things that didn't work so well, so that you have sort of concrete points of improvement for your kind of future episodes, right? And you should absolutely identify and leverage your team's strengths, right? So we have a massive team, and depending on how big your team is, you should definitely know who's interested in who's taking on a certain role and who's good at taking on a specific role, right? And some people from the very get-go were really great at audio engineering. Other people were really great at branding, right? Other people were really great at social media. So you should know the strengths of your team members and know how to leverage those to make sure that people are doing a role that they like doing, and also doing a role where they feel like they can grow and kind of contribute their strengths. And then the other thing I'll say is you should absolutely try to set deadlines to keep the production moving. And this maybe fits with the first 2 points. You're never going to have a perfect production, right? It's an iterative growth process. You're always going to keep going. And so if you're able to just push yourself a little bit and say, okay, we're going to do 1 episode a month or 2 episodes a month, that's going to help you and your team stay accountable to those deadlines and keep it going, right? And I think that just goes with anything you kind of set your mind to when you're scheduling. If you have more of a schedule, you're more likely to stick to it. And whether things go well, you're able to kind of, capitalize on that and keep moving forward. If things don't go well in certain aspects, you're able to recognize that and address some of those limitations for next time. So I think that's all I have to say. And I'm right on schedule, it looks like. And I don't see any questions. So yeah. We have about 30 seconds, so I welcome any final questions you have. But if there's no questions, I think I'll stop here. And yeah, I thank you guys all for attending, and I hope you will stay tuned for our next chat, which is going to be our Podcast 101 panel. And that's it. Thanks again. Oh, okay. And then the question here, okay, so just one quick question. What is the main limitation of Audacity that led to moving to Audition? So we didn't actually use Audacity. I think from the very get-go, we chose Hindenburg, which was a lot simpler to use. And originally, it was very convenient. Everyone could pick it up. It didn't have much of a learning curve, but we felt that it wasn't powerful enough when it came time to do things like noise reduction or cutting out very specific clips. That's where we found that Audition really enabled us to do those things that where Hindenburg didn't. And did you have a new project? Oh, could you put back the slide that you mentioned? Yes. Okay, so just 1 minute, and I want to make sure I am being respectful of time, but I will share the slide. Were you using Hindenburg or Journalist Pro? Okay, so it looks like we're going to make all of the slides available to you guys afterwards, so you will be able to access them. We were just using the regular Hindenburg. I think it was just the regular Hindenburg Journalist, not the Pro edition. Okay, as a newbie, I feel overwhelmed with all the steps, platforms, and tools. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I mean, again, it's a very stepwise process. You're never going to be able to do it alone. I mean, you would if you devote your life to it, but all the great podcasts, whether they're student-led or professional, they all have really great teams behind them. So it's just a matter of finding people that you can work with and finding people that you can share a vision with to just kind of work together and build up your passion. So I think I will stop here in the interest of time. Thanks again for having me today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the sessions. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'll have our discussion at 4:10. Okay, thanks everyone.